Welcome to Healing Lives with Corey Gilbert, a podcast sponsored by the Healing Lives Center. Discover how to love and lead your family well and biblically. God created sex, marriage, and the family for our stewardship, growth, and benefit. My heart and passion is to teach, train, educate, and disciple Christians that want strong marriages and families. The Healing Lives Center has been serving Christians since the year 2000. Its mission is to be a center for sex, trauma, and marriage education and transformation, where we offer counseling, coaching, courses, and speaking services to you, your church, or ministry. Check us out at healinglives.com. Welcome. Today I have an amazing conversation that I'm looking forward to because it's such a really, really important topic with Carrie Bock. Thank you so much for being on with me.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, you have a focus that's so needed for us to talk about, and one that as Christians, we often ignore completely. It flies under the radar, or we actually act like it's something that's not something we can talk about. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation and kind of your expertise. So tell us about you and kind of how you got into this and your focus on OCD and anxiety.
Sure. I am a licensed professional counselor in Tennessee. I have a bit of a hybrid practice. I am mostly online, seeing clients throughout Tennessee, but then I also do in-person intensive sessions for clients who are looking to do some very specific trauma-based work.
Nice.
And to go through and clear things out in a shorter amount of time rather than having to open it up and close it back down over and over and over again, week by week. So for those clients who are looking to, for example, even overcome a phobia, we can kind of desensitize them in that day process instead of having to take a long time to get through it. So I like to say, I'll move as fast or as slow as you want me to, just kind of depending on what you're wanting. But awesome. I also have a podcast called Hope for Anxiety and OCD that I started a couple years ago. And it's a welcome place for struggling Christians to reduce shame, increase hope, and develop healthier connections with God and others.
Nice. That's so good. It's neat that you do things that way, because I don't meet very many counselors who are doing what you're doing. I do the same thing. I do intensives. I don't do 50-minute sessions once a week for the eternity. It's get in there. Let's actually really do some hard work and see change actually very quickly, which is really important, especially with OCD and anxiety. Those can drag on if not treated well.
Right. And I find that in our society, people do want to get better faster, and they often don't think that that's an option or don't realize that that's an option because they've been kind of sold just a typical 50-minute therapeutic hour. And not to say that that's not helpful, because it certainly helped a lot of people. But like you said, with some people, it takes them a little while to get into the work. And so next thing you know, you're about 30 minutes in, and then they're ready, and then you've only got about 20 minutes left. So that can kind of hamper getting much done on the week-to-week basis.
Well, even 2 hours in sometimes. Like I do 4 to 6 hour sessions, and I can be 2 or 3 hours in, and it's like, we really haven't. I know there's more here. We've gotten some, but so to have stopped and start again, you kind of have to start all over. And so I've loved seeing what happens in hours 3 and 4 and even 5 sometimes personally. That model is one I think it's more about the patient versus about, sad to say, even just a counselor having a weekly revenue. That's kind of the model, if you will. But your heart is really Christians, where this is an area that we don't talk about enough. OCD specifically, I don't hear much talked about. Anxiety is almost a badge of honor now, and sad to say, but still not treated well. And OCD is talked about. So what have you learned, and what have you heard from clients? What's been your experience that's helped you even dig deeper?
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the reasons I started my podcast in the first place, because I wanted to see who is speaking into the mental health space for Christians, and not just like okay, I have anxiety, because there are tons of probably books and seminars and different things for Christians, specifically with anxiety, right? And devotional books. I mean, probably overload. You could find several, maybe even might be able to find a workbook. But when you start to look into OCD, what you're going to find is you're going to find some personal stories, but not really much in terms of like clinical help. So I wanted to find this mixture of like, okay, how can we take all of Jesus, all of the Bible, all of the good, really good, juicy Christian stuff, and also combine it with all of the really good clinical mental health stuff so that we're not just giving people, like sometimes in the Christian space, we're giving them, like I said, the devotional, it's like mental health light
Yeah. Yeah.
versus like
Exactly.
that's going to help a lot of people with generalized anxiety, but doesn't necessarily help somebody who's struggling with a clinical anxiety disorder, or especially not for OCD, because what happens is someone with OCD goes and tries to apply common scriptures to their life. You know, let me pray and find peace. Let me try to take every thought captive, make it
Hmm.
obedient to Christ. And then they're like, I can't do this. They
Yeah,
end up with a lot of shame.
I do.
And what I've found is that talking to Christians in my practice, they were like, I was like, who knows about this? Have you told your pastor? Have you talked with someone at your church? And they just look at me almost in horror, like,
Yeah.
no, like I can't talk about that. What do you mean? I mean, people are gonna think I'm crazy if I tell them that I'm having these types of thought processes. And I think that that's really sad because the church is designed to be a hospital for sick people. And so if we can't be okay, we're really good if someone has cancer, but somehow when someone has OCD, then we just like look like deer in the headlights and we have no idea what to do. So I want to kind of change that conversation, and also create resources, create encouragement, create support for my clients who were struggling to know you're not alone. We have a lot of personal stories on the podcast where people will talk about their anxiety or their OCD, and talk about how they've gotten help, talk about, how they've kind of come out of the shame piece from it, how they've recognized, like, oh, maybe it is okay if I take medication versus it being this bad thing that people do. I've even heard people say in the church, like, you can't take mental health medications. It's not
Mhm.
shined upon in certain circles. So it just really depends on where you're coming from. Obviously, there are some people that are very open to it, but then there are some people who are not. That just depending on the circle and the circumstance and denomination, maybe.
Mhm. I remember hearing a story of a pastor who, or he's a professor, but he was guest speaking at a church, and how he shared in front of this large congregation, a mega church, about his own struggle for anxiety, with anxiety. When he got off stage, the deacons met him at the uh, down there and said, "You will never speak here again. How dare you show vulnerability and show that you're not basically perfect?" And he's never been invited to come back to that church again. Which, what's cool is he's now written books on this, and he's actually gotten, like, it's sad how there's still this stigma. And what's annoying to me is that even the word mental health, everyone has a mental health.
Yes,
Did we
yes, that's
go,
very true.
they have a mental
Hmm.
health, I don't. No, you might be okay and they're struggling, but you'll probably realize you actually have one too, that you're stewarding, and there's some areas you can grow in terms of your mental health. So it's like we need to kind of normalize. It's almost like instead we're normalizing just dysfunction. Like I joke to my college students that they tend to get their medical advice from TikTok and, you know YouTubers.
That's scary.
It is. And the sad thing is that's what's happening for adolescents. Oftentimes they're going to listen to their peers hands down over medical or a doctor or a counselor. So to have someone that's speaking in from a biblical Christian worldview, but with practical, tangible, doable skills. So go back to OCD. If I tell someone with OCD, here, read your Bible, here, do this, don't they take it to the nth degree of, I don't do it the
Yeah,
smart way I do. It's got to be perfect. which means
Yeah, I mean,
they would
sometimes they can
shame.
get really stuck up on like certain scripture passages,
Yeah.
especially with, there's different subtypes of OCD. So, especially with scrupulosity, which is like the religious subtype, where, they Christians will get stuck on like, can I lose my salvation, or am I going to hell, or have I committed the unpardonable sin? And really like ruminate these things over and over. And a lot of times, our pastors also are not trained that this is a sign of OCD. So they're like, okay, John is just really having a hard time feeling secure in his understanding that he really is saved and he really is a Christian, and we need to like come around him, and maybe this is spiritual warfare, and maybe John the devil may be trying to tell you that you're not saved and you need to pray. And so if people aren't picking up on what this looks
Yeah.
like, then we aren't going to be able to help people. So that's another piece too, is just the education of it all is so huge, even for our pastors and lay people to kind of know, hey, these are some signs and symptoms that somebody may be struggling a little bit more than just, hey, they have a lot of questions about their faith. Because, we all knew that one kid in youth group maybe that always had their hand raised, and I don't know, maybe that was me sometimes, who knows, but or you always have a question about something, or they're like, what about this? Or, what about the people before Jesus, and all of these types of things. But OCD, people who are struggling with that can really get stuck on those things, causing a high level of fear and distress.
Right.
Even though, and even some of the language that we use in church sometimes, like, do you know that you know that you know? Do you have complete assurance, that you're saved? Like, those are
No.
really not good things for
Yeah.
people who are dealing with OCD. It's like,
So
can
then
really kind of
how do you
scare
get the
them.
diagnosis of OCD? So like what would that be? Someone in church, Joe, Sarah,
Hmm.
different people, um, they're going to go to their doctor. Oftentimes, that's usually where we go, is maybe even general practitioner. Like, where did that diagnosis come from? Because a lot of people self-diagnose, and that's a whole different story. Um,
Sure.
where does the diagnosis come from, and what are they actually? What is it exactly? For those that are listening, like, what?
Yeah, I mean, it takes a person with OCD an average of 7 years to get diagnosed, which is a really sad
Oh,
story because that's a
oh,
really long time to be
oh,
dealing with something and not knowing what you're dealing with. So typically, what'll happen is someone will come to a counselor or a doctor and say, "I'm anxious." And then that individual will start treating them like they're anxious, unless they're trained to kind of dive in and add a little bit more questions. So when I am talking to somebody and I think they might be dealing with OCD, I will always ask them, do you seek out reassurance from other people? Like, are you asking them questions to kind of reassure yourself? Because that's a very common OCD characteristic. Another thing I'll ask them is, how much time are you spending on Google or researching things? And so
nice.
they'll tell me stories about, well, I found this bump on my leg, and then I was on Google for 2 hours, or YouTube. I was watching these videos trying to figure out, do I have some kind of disease or rash or what's going
Okay.
on? So the idea is there's these obsessions that people get stuck on, could be, what if this bump of my leg is some kind of disease? That would be like
Right.
more of a somatic obsession. They can get stuck on sexual obsessions, harm obsessions, relationship obsessions. There's all different kinds of obsessions. So it's not just germs and cleanliness. That's really what I want to get out there and educate people
Right.
about, because a
Good.
lot of times people think, oh, it's like Monk, on TV. He has to, he can't touch the door handle. He has to use a handkerchief, or he's got to have things lined up just so in his house. And OCD can look like that, but it more commonly takes a wide range of obsessions. And then the compulsions, another reason it's not diagnosed or not picked up on right away, is many of the compulsions can be internal. So we often think of the person that, checks the door lock 3 times. That would be like checking or redoing a behavior. That certainly is a compulsion. Washing hands is a compulsion that people are familiar with, but they're not as familiar with people repeating certain prayers in their head. So maybe if someone thinks like if they have a violent intrusion, they may say a certain prayer or feel like they have to confess over and over again. And that the engaging in the obsessions and the compulsions, like it provides a temporary level of relief when someone engages in a compulsion. It's a little bit of a exhale, like just for a moment, but
Dopamine
then
hit.
the the fear comes back, and it's the what if comes back, and the questioning, and the doubt. It's called the doubter's disease sometimes. So that will creep back in, and it people get caught in that loop, is what I call it, the obsession compulsion loop.
Yeah. How do you think this kind of ties into these suckers, smartphones now, social media? Like I feel like this is
Oh
kind of
man.
ratcheted up the level of probably more common than ever before what's going on with the obsessions and compulsions when it comes to now the relationship we have with these devices.
Well, absolutely. Because if you think about research, if you or I wanted to research 20 years ago, we'd, drive ourselves to a library. We'd be looking up encyclopedias. We'd be,
Yep.
we had the internet, but it was super slow,
Yep.
those types of things. And now we can just be in our living rooms and pull out a smartphone, and we can have a wealth of information, a ton, and really go down. You can go down a Google or YouTube rabbit hole for hours, because I've certainly had clients tell me about it. Clients who looked up apologetics videos for 2-3 hours, because they were trying to prove some tenet of the faith that they were worried about or
Well, that's like
doubting.
a badge of
Um,
honor there too. It's like, why would that be diagnosable? I'm researching
right.
something good, or I'm researching even like you said, a bump on my leg. I'm researching that. That sounds like good stewardship. No, again, this is getting misdiagnosed, if not completely missed, because there's a
Right.
problem here that is actually treatable, that you're really
Yeah.
not okay.
And it's highly distressing internally. And people are trying to relieve that distress, but in the process of trying to relieve that distress, they're just creating more distress. And that's just what's really like painful and hard about this condition is it's almost like getting stuck in quicksand. The more that you're in it, you just sink further and further down. I have a bit of a potato chip analogy with OCD. I like to say that, if OCD had a saying, it would be like the potato chip commercial where you can't eat just one, so that initial
Uh-huh.
compulsion, or the initial obsession starts in, and you think, well, I'll just do this compulsion and then I'll feel a little bit better. But then it's like, oh, that desire just keeps going. And next thing you know, you're on the couch and you have a half eaten bag of potato chips and you're feeling terrible, and the shame sets in of like, oh man, like I just ate a whole half a bag of potato chips. Or, for that person with OCD, man, I've just been on Google for 3 hours and I needed to fold my laundry and,
Mhm.
clean my house, and I haven't, or I need to write a paper for school. I've just sat here.
Which again, I think it's probably more because of smartphones, because of social media, it's more normal and normalized. Which, when I think of college students, when I think of just people around everywhere, you're on your phone, you're distracted, you're searching, you're asking questions. We're losing actual relationships. We're losing a lot of the meat of life when we're always doing that. But we actually almost don't see it as bad. It's become so
Right.
normal. Which, so you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned distress. So that's actually the key word when it comes to diagnosis, is when it's causing me distress. A lot of people don't realize that what they're doing is causing them distress, do they?
And if it's not causing them distress, I mean, you just mentioned the relationship piece. It's causing someone in their family distress. It's
Yeah.
causing their spouse distress because they're saying, no, I have to go immediately hop in the shower because I just touched something that I believed was contaminated. I have to, do this type of ritual when I get home or when I leave the house. Sometimes it can, if they have checking rituals, it could take them 30 minutes to leave the house because I need to make sure that the oven is off and I need to make sure that the curling iron's not on because the house could burn down, and unplug the TV. I mean, if you just think about the different appliances and things that you could go check and unplug, you could be in your house for 30 minutes to an hour, and then all of a sudden it's affecting my work because I'm late on a habitual basis, or it's affecting my spouse because they feel like, okay, we can't ever, go anywhere. It's really hard for you to leave. You have to check all these things. Or, children are messy. They're sticky. They're all kinds of things. So obviously that can be pretty distressful if someone has some type of
Mhm.
contamination, OCD. And then because OCD gets attached to things that people really care about, if they do have children, they may have obsessions about their children, about accidentally harming their children, or that their children are going to get harmed in some way if they don't engage in these compulsive behaviors. So it really is a
Tied
disorder
together.
that definitely affects other family members. Yeah.
So then if a person were to reach out to you and the people you work with, what is, I guess, show me a typical session, intensive. What's the focus? What would
Outline.
you do? What does that look like? Because again, a lot of people, what they're doing
Yeah.
also, they're afraid to go to a counselor because of their own perception or movies of what it is, not reality. A
And
person can
I'm
actually help.
just learning from TV shows that um, counselors on TV are incredibly unethical. I don't know if you've ever noticed
It's
about that.
horrible.
They have dual relationships all over the place, but that's another story.
Well, even like
So,
teachers, the amount of teachers portrayed on, I'm a professor. It's like they're sleeping with their students or
yes,
marrying their students. And it's like, this is all of it's messed up. Yet that's teaching our younger generation, this is normal. And that's same for when we were
right.
younger too. Grew up on Friends and other TV shows. You're shaped negatively as well. But yes,
Yeah.
so that
For
session, what's that
me,
look like?
I provide a lot of education
Okay.
about OCD. And if they're a Christian, that intersection, obviously, like this is how it's, affecting your faith, it looks
Yeah.
like, and really helping people learn to sit with doubt and uncertainty, which we all have at some point in our life, because I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. In my own life, I can tell you what I have planned for tomorrow, but that doesn't mean that it's going
Yeah.
to occur, especially not the way I've planned it. So, really learning to kind of sit with some of that ambiguity, even in terms of faith. There are things that we can have confidence in based on the Bible, but it does take faith. Like our faith takes faith, if that makes sense. And so that means believing in something that we can't see. And we're not going to have all the answers and we're not going to be perfect. So being able to sit with that discomfort of the uncertainty for people with OCD is very hard. I use a lot of mindfulness with my clients. And so the education piece is important. The mindfulness piece is important. Understanding the difference between a thought and a desire is really huge
Nice.
for someone with OCD. So if they think, if I have this thought that I'm going to harm my children,
Yeah.
that means I want to harm my
Right.
children. Those are two completely different things that they have to learn to separate. So we can help them like become, through mindfulness, becoming really good at sitting in the present. It's
Yeah.
like learning to notice, oh, I'm noticing I am having a thought about harming my children. I know this falls within my typical OCD obsessional range. And if you are able to learn to kind of
Those
detach from
connections.
your thought process instead of being sucked into it, then you can say, oh, bam, like that's an OCD thought.
Nice.
Because I'm very trauma informed, I always look for any type of trauma that a person's experienced that may be latching into some of their symptomology,
Good.
hospitalizations, and medical trauma, deaths in the family where they became really, really stuck and concerned on certain things. A lot of those can be at the root of some OCD experiences. That's not necessarily a common and popular belief that you're going to hear from a lot of people out there, because
I think
OCD is
you're
typically treated
I think you're dead
very
on.
behaviorally.
Yes. It
Yeah.
is. And I think I'm so frustrated with the industry at times in this in service
Yes.
of where we miss trauma. And that's my
Mm-hmm.
heart and passion and work I do is all from the trauma lens and the amount of bipolar diagnoses that I see that are all of a sudden go away when they deal with the trauma. It's like that's not how bipolar works. It's a misdiagnosis,
Right.
missing the
Mm-hmm.
actual root. And so I think you're hitting the nail on the head with the trauma piece. It's not always, but
Right.
have that lens. But you've mentioned education, which is so critical. You're helping teach them about something that allows them to then be more informed in their daily life, but when they're not with you, of what their
Yeah.
processes are like and what their thinking's like, and like you said, thought versus desire. And then mindfulness provides tools, which those two things alone are invaluable. Like those,
Mm-hmm.
that's
Yeah.
huge. We
Absolutely.
haven't
It's
even gotten
huge.
into them sharing their story, or because that's even oftentimes not as necessary as I think education and the tools, which
Yeah. And just really getting to something that another OCD therapist told me is they said, OCD is traumatic in itself. And I had never really thought about it that way. It's not a like life or death trauma, but if you thinking about being an 8-year-old child and internally all you hear is you've done something bad, you have to go tell your mom now, you have to confess. And you go to your mom and you confess, and your mom's like, okay, all right, honey, go back to bed, or whatever it is. And then, like, that pattern gets repeated. And at some point or another, mom's like, what is going on here, with this child? Like, and a lot of times the parents, it's not been on their radar. Now, that's changing as time goes on and we know more and more about mental health and in children and teenagers, but a lot of the clients that I'm seeing as adults, their parents had no idea that they were dealing with OCD when they were younger. And so it caused some, rifts in the family, or it caused some high levels of internal distress for the kids. So sometimes what we do is we go back and process that experience where you were really worked up and you felt out of control. A lot of times it has to do with feelings of times that they were out of control, or times that they tried to be in control but couldn't as a child.
when part of what I even hear you say is, so we're going to have education, we're going to teach some tools, but we're going to go back into some of the stories and almost in a sense look at them from a different angle because of what we've taught,
Yeah,
and because we have skills now. We can look back and go, oh, mom, I have grace now. Mom and dad didn't understand that they still really loved me. Wow, I
yeah,
lost that love part because of my focusing on the fact that they missed me, or they missed what was going on. They didn't see me. As you're helping them
yeah,
reframe their story. The stories is still the same. Like can't change the
right.
past, but all of a sudden I feel different today because of again the processing, mindfulness skills, and then education. And then
Yeah, I
dad,
use a lot of
right,
I use a lot of ego state work, which is parts work integrated into trauma
love
therapy,
love the
EMDR that
part
I
stuff.
use.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
it's
think
so
that
it's
language
really
is
great.
wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah, to have like the adult, like very resource part of self, be able to tell that child, like, you have OCD, it's a condition, you're not crazy, it's not your fault, and you're going to be okay. Like, because that was the piece that was missing for them that they didn't get. And so being able to provide it in the present, it sounds hokey and weird
love it.
sometimes to people who've
It
never done
does.
it before, but
It
it's
does.
so therapeutic and healing
It
in
is.
the right context of processing trauma. It just really relieves a lot for people,
And
is what
if
I've
you're
found.
listening to this, I mean, it's internal family systems is one of the most, to me, one of the most powerful tools. There are some really, really good resources from Richard Schwartz and others that have been written about internal family systems, and that's what the parts conversation kind of is. And that's again another one of those education pieces that when you start giving them vocabulary, the phrase I pretty much use is all of a sudden I see that I'm not crazy. That's the clinical term for most of it.
Right.
I'm crazy.
Yeah.
What's wrong with me? No, you're actually struggling. And oftentimes you're fighting yourself because
Yeah.
it's okay to think that,
Huge.
but what do I do with it? It's okay to feel that, but what do I do with it? It's normal to think that or feel that, or wow, this is really abnormal. Okay, now what do I do with that? That's where it gets into a little more messier, and where OCD isn't just the hand washing and checking, and it's actually much broader, which I'm glad we're having this conversation. And you mentioned even anxiety
Yeah.
too. It's tied to these things, which they're all kind of interconnected. and
Yeah,
we
and
almost like split them up, which isn't necessarily always good.
that's true. And I really try to look at, what is the person bringing in? What's their symptomology more so than just like trying to slap some kind of label on them. What are the symptoms and what's really driving that? What's behind that behavior that you're engaging in? What's interesting too, a lot of times is people are fearing fear, if that makes sense. If you
Yep.
look at someone that's having panic attacks, it's
Yep.
like, okay, now I don't want to leave the house because I'm afraid. I'm fearing that I'm going to have this reaction that I've had in the past
Yeah.
before. So it's like it's a fear of
Loop.
being afraid, and then that just ramps up
Yep.
the anxiety even more
That's what
versus being
I
able to
talk
say,
about
okay,
with anger. Like what we learn in church oftentimes is when I'm angry, what do? I get angry at my anger. I'm like,
shut it down.
that's now I'm doubly angry. Really? That's not the smart path to go versus stop, pause. Why am I angry? Talk to it, which sounds weird. It's like, wow, I'm angry because someone pulled in front of me. Okay, oh my gosh, get over yourself. Like you can't control the drivers around you. Like you're angry and versus I'm angry because there was an injustice or I'm angry because I got passed over for promotion. Okay, that's a very valid, but what are you going to do with it? I can process that. With OCD, it's like all those networks are missing connections or missing permissions to be able to communicate and to allow for a healthy processing, which you're basically saying you help offer and teach education and skills to then have those conversations in my head, which we all do, to then
Yeah.
function better in this world, still having OCD potentially, but now I'm managing.
Right. And ultimately you're wanting to help people get out of that loop is the
Exactly.
long story short. So you get towards, the end and you're saying, okay, can you have that obsession? Can you notice it without engaging in the compulsion?
Nice.
Can you notice how uncomfortable that might feel to do that? And then you can have people practice, which is more of a typical, say, exposure response prevention is what you hear
Right.
of a lot of times with OCD. And I just want to say for anybody listening, that's not the only therapy out there for OCD. There are people using acceptance and commitment therapy. There are people using mindfulness based interventions and trauma based therapies for OCD. So
Right. Right.
I get very frustrated, like you said, when the clinicians are as rigid as those people that they are trying to treat. I don't find that to be very helpful at all.
Amen. 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 Love it. So
Yeah.
I know people are all going to go at a different pace. Have you seen people come to you and within one session, their life is really a different experience? In just one session?
As far as like from doing the intensives or
Yep.
just in
Doing
general, like a
intensive.
50-minute
No, intensive.
sessions.
Intensives.
Yeah, well, probably the person I'm thinking of most recently, I did have someone that had a phobia and for a long, long time had this phobia. And she was able to get cleared of that in two one
Nice.
day intensive sessions. And it was just very interesting. I mean, the stuff that it went back to when we were really trying to just kind of follow her body and
Hmm.
see like where things were coming from. I mean, I'm sure she was probably surprised by some of the memories that came up connected to this phobia. Like, oh, really? That's where some of that stuff came from, and was
Nice.
able to process through and clear it. And then with EMDR, we can do basically what's called a future template, where we kind of have you imagine. We did more of an imaginal exposure for
Hmm.
her because we couldn't do a, you know, live exposure with what she was afraid of. So we did an imaginal one and she was able to get through that and really well and was like, okay, I think I feel like I can do this. And that was just pretty amazing. I was like, wow, that's
That's
incredible. Like,
so
why?
amazing. I love it.
Like, it would have taken probably, that's why I try to explain to people, you're talking about months of therapy in a day.
Right.
So it really is a good value because it probably would have taken months of
Months.
therapy to
Absolutely. And
get
that's what I
through that.
see. I see that it
Yeah.
takes months for most clinicians, and you're able to in a couple of weeks, a couple of sessions, which I think is so much more beneficial for the client. A bigger, it's doing no harm. It's better service on almost every rubric. It's actually a better even
Right.
money on their part. I just think that's a powerful testimony, if
Yeah.
you will. Obviously, some
And
people are
I've
going to take longer. It's not
Sure, sure. And people with complex trauma histories or, very severe symptoms, they're spending hours and hours on something. That's a different story. And sometimes people need, higher level of services like intensive outpatient therapy
right,
for OCD or residential treatment, things
right.
like that. There are certainly services in place for that if they're feeling like, I can't seem to get through any kind of length of time without engaging in these compulsions.
Right.
But I think what I've seen is that individuals, the biggest piece really for people who are doing ongoing therapy is letting go of the shame piece
Yes.
and recognizing like, okay, like it's okay to be a Christian and struggle with this. It doesn't mean I'm a bad Christian because I'm struggling. I can, it's okay to have a mental health disorder and that God still loves me, that compassion is still there, and I don't have to be perfect. I don't have to earn that love. I mean, that in itself is
So
super
critical.
powerful.
That is so critical.
Yeah,
Absolutely. The shame piece, the amount of people that carry shame, really, I would say everyone. We
at
all
some level,
have
yeah.
shame, kind of like we all have a
Mhm.
mental health. And so it's more like, so how are you stewarding the things in your life that actually bring you shame, whether it's something you thought, something you did, something you're doing, past, present. I think that's a work that we need to be doing in the church, period, in small groups all the time. It's my personal opinion. This could be something that
Yeah,
can be done
absolutely.
just as part of teaching people that we are all fallen and we all have areas of struggle. Now, the shame that a lot of the clients I have, a lot of them carry, what's so difficult is it's shame that's not theirs to carry. I deal more with the sexual
Mm.
abuse side.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like
Mhm.
you're no, it's shame on them, not you. And so helping release that. You mentioned earlier EMDR. So what does that stand for? What does
Yeah.
that mean?
EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a really fancy name that isn't relevant.
Well, but it's
So
a
that's why we
tool.
just call it EMDR.
Yeah. And it's a tool.
It's a therapeutic technique.
Yes. That's really, really,
Yeah,
really cool that how much it works.
effective.
It's
Yeah, for
very
trauma.
effective. And
Hmm.
again, for those listening, research it. It's interesting. It's weird. And from what I've even seen in some of the research, it's like we don't know why it works, but we know it works. So it's kind of funny the way they kind of, and it's kind of old school is your eyes going back and forth with a finger. I
Hmm.
use the TheraTappers, which just tap back and forth in your hand like little eggs you hold. Um,
Yeah,
but
those are
that
good too.
tool allows you to almost kind of this is the way I conceptualize it, like put a path between the thoughts and the emotions, which allows the body to almost
Mm.
kind of calm down and still deal with either the trauma or the memory, but in a less activating way. Would you, how would you put it? How does that sound?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like there are new pathways essentially that form in the brain when you're doing EMDR. I mean, we have a lot of research on neuroplasticity
Mhm.
just in general, which is, changes in the brain happening after people have, it doesn't have to be after somebody has a stroke, but after somebody has a stroke, part of their brain may be damaged, but they go to therapy or they have some speech therapy and there's some rewiring actually that happens in their brain. So from a
Right.
mental health standpoint, we're doing the same thing with traumatic memories. Essentially, it's moving from short-term storage of this is the fight, flight, or freeze. I'm re-experiencing this right now to that was something in the past. So like I don't have to
Exactly.
continue to carry that out into my
Love that.
future.
Love that.
Yeah,
That's such an important tool. Yeah. And then
yeah. It really
going back in
is.
the past, like if you think of, you mentioned how I think it was the person you were talking about earlier, how they hadn't made a connection with their phobia to things in their past. I see that too as well. It's like they have no idea that what's the day-to-day battle is actually linked to something that's very tangible in their memory. And
Right.
all we do is we almost like point at the memory and point these together, and all of a sudden their whole world's changed. It's not that simple, but in some ways it's like, oh my gosh, my whole life makes more sense now. and now there's just a little bit of work
Yeah.
to clean up afterwards. To me, that's one of the most coolest pieces of our, like, how simple we are in some sense, but how there is a reason why you're probably obsessing, compulsing, or in this space. And when you
Yeah, I
make
don't think we
sense,
just develop or grow mental health symptoms
no,
overnight. That just
right?
doesn't really
The
make
reason,
sense in a lot of
yeah, reason
ways.
why I'm
Yeah.
anxious. There's a reason I'm living in fear, especially after the last few years that we've
Hmm.
dealt with the craziness. Like it's even more so. So it's like how to understand. Yeah, this makes sense, but then now I need skills to proceed, which is what a therapist or counselor offers. So
Right. And we go through periods of our life where maybe two or three things happened. I know I've had that in my own life where it's like if you had one of those isolated things to deal with, you probably would have dealt with it better or okay. But then you pile two or three other things on top of it and it's like
yeah.
almost overload now. Like my stress response, I can only take so much. And now I have to start unpacking some of this. So that sometimes the trauma, people think, well, it wasn't really that big of a deal, but it may not have just been that. It was that, but then also there was a death in the family, maybe around the same time, or there, your loved one, spouse, or your mother, whoever didn't respond well
Right.
when you disclose. That
Yep.
can cause all kinds of, issues, and that's a separate thing in itself. But yeah, a lot of things have affected us that we
Mhm.
don't want to think has affected us. And we have to realize, especially with things that have happened to us as children, our brains were still developing then. We didn't have the adult level of thinking about the world and the perspective that we have now. So
Right.
when we go back and work on those things, it's almost like we're giving that gift. We're giving that
Right.
adult, like you said, the shift in perspective,
Yep.
gift to that like child self within us, that we're able to look at things differently, and then that just really shifts things in our brain. I believe that.
We like to minimize kind of our story when we compare it to others. Comparison is, we do it, but it's actually a very dangerous exercise that we engage in. And social media and things have made it even easier to compare. And it's usually comparing to a lie, but or missed or half truth. But
Mm-hmm.
we are wired a certain way, just even as humans, but even fallen beings, people that are not perfect. So the grace piece of that's critical to be able to give yourself grace to, you're not going to always have it all together. And like you said about the multiple things stacking up, it's amazing how we seem to have, even culturally in the church, kind of more of a buck up, suck it up mentality versus
Yeah.
if we just sat there for just a few moments, even and allowed us to go, wow, I need to grieve. And that's an area that I think we're not, that's where we're missing a lot. Ouch, that hurt. I can then proceed in a much healthier way. But instead, we often just push the people through seasons where they missed out on this piece or that piece of grief. And so resentment builds, or compulsions and obsessions build, or anxiety builds. So people come to whatever that diagnosis is very honestly. So like what I tell my students is if you don't understand a person, you're not asking the right questions. Like get to know them more. Why
Get
are
more
they?
information.
Mhm.
Yeah,
We're paid to do
absolutely.
that
And
in a sense.
even people who come from a good Christian family, I like to say nobody was raised by Jesus or Mother Teresa, and so,
Yeah.
our parents were imperfect and they did the best that they could with what they had. But we can say, hey, I had really good parents who tried really hard, and also in the same breath, like say, and I didn't get everything that I needed because they weren't perfect. And
That's a
there were
hundred
times
percent.
where
100% of people.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, there were times where I really needed somebody and maybe they weren't there for me, or
Right.
maybe they didn't know how to help me. Maybe
Exactly.
they didn't know how to be with their own emotional experience, so they couldn't be with my emotional experience.
Well, I was talking to my 14-year-old yesterday. He's wrestling with some stuff right now, and I was like, Blaze, I said, we're here always, and you know that, and we approach you often to check in and to push and to help provide that space for you to ask things of us or to wrestle. but we've also partnered with your youth pastor and our scout leaders and our homeschool co-op friend. Like we have people in your life that are all there on purpose. We've vetted these people. We've built this on purpose to be the kind of people that you're able to go to when you won't come to us because we know that there's times you're not going to come to us. Same for our 16-year-old. It's like you're struggling with something. Go to someone, pick one of those people, but don't try to go this alone. And it's hard. I mean,
Don't
I'm
suffer in
I'm
silence.
a
Yeah.
shrink and I'm like, I can't fix my own kids. Well, exactly, because they are human beings with free will, with their own struggles, their own, even worldviews for that matter. And so it's like how to help them grow up into young men that actually are trustworthy and helpful and godly and protectors. And same for my daughter who's 12. It's like she's in a different space. So it's like how to my wife and we love each other. We're a great marriage, but it's like, yeah, I call my kids my three experiments. They will have their stuff. And most of it we know because we've talked about it. We'll talk at the dinner table about, so where are we missing it as parents? And they'll tell us, and that's not fun always.
Wow,
It
that's a scary question to ask your
is.
children.
It is. But it's wanting to be saying, hey, none of us have this together 100%, and none of us are perfect. And
Right.
here's what I'm wrestling with. Here's where I'm struggling, or here's where I've got questions about God. And this is an important, the home to me is the place to have those conversations. But the second of that is the church. But it's amazing how
Yeah,
many homes
absolutely.
and churches are not safe places to ask hard questions because people want you to snap back into line. And so, no,
Yeah.
a good a good potential future leader is one that asks really hard questions when they're younger.
Yeah.
They're not okay with the
Je-
status quo.
Jesus asked some really hard questions of some
Oh, I
people, if
love
you
it.
want to think about it that way. There was
Oh,
definitely a lot of challenge, but at the same time, a balance in knowing how to sit with difficult situations and sit with people who are hurting.
yeah.
And, sometimes, yes, he did heal people, but sometimes, like, they had to wait a little while. You think about the Lazarus situation, Mary and Martha's like, why didn't you show up? Why weren't you here? What happened?
Well, and how
And,
many other
and,
people he didn't heal
sure.
in that
Yeah.
time on Earth for him? It's like, what about all those other stories of the people that died or did this and that happen or the abuse going on down the street? My mind can't even wrap around
Mm-hmm.
that. It's like because he was actually as a man, he could only do so much too, because he was actually living as a human man with limitations. He pulled himself away and he went in prayer and got away from the crowds and
Yeah.
how much even those in ministry especially just go 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 and don't take care of themselves and how many people in counselors who are actually struggling in their marriages and bad relationships with their kids and it's like no, you should be
Sure.
someone who have your house in order as well. And
Yeah.
I don't see that. I see a lot of dysfunction in church ministry and in the helping profession.
Sure. You definitely have to put on your own oxygen mask first, until you
Yep,
can
yep.
help someone else. My daughter's really young. She's only 1 right now, so I'm just waiting for her to get older and be like, "Mom, why are you using that counselor stuff on me?" Like, no, I'm not taking it.
Which it's neat. My kids have not ever really played that card um, because
Oh, that's good.
I don't play that. I don't work with them that way.
Hmm.
And they're each so different. Me and my middle guy, Blaze, him and I just fight. Like we'll just go at each other because our personalities are a little too the same. And my oldest shuts down and gets real hard, and so we have to kind of crack our way in there. And my daughter Miley is just amazing. She's 12 and she's got her whole life planned out. She's so different than the boys, and everyone's so different, and I love that.
Yeah.
And your daughters,
Yeah.
and God already has a plan, and it has all those pieces, and the friends that she's going to have, and the hard times that he's going to even allow. And it's like, again, how does our brain wrap around that God has all that in his hands? Otherwise, if you
Yeah.
don't think that way, we do want to control everything and we want to wrap them in bubble wrap. And nope. They need to scrape their
Yeah, that
knees.
doesn't work.
They need to fall. Yep, yep. Well, this has been such a helpful conversation. So good to meet you and talk with you. And I love what you're doing. Your
Thank you.
podcast is Hope for Anxiety and OCD. Website is hopeforanxietyandocd.com. Just as it sounds.
Yes.
Go to your website and there's free resources, book an appointment, and even it looks like a blog. So multiple things there for you to kind of dive into.
Lots
And
of interaction. Yeah, you can
uh,
contact us there. You can listen to our episodes. You can get a free audio download. Lots of good
excellent.
resources. And I'm also creating a course in the
Nice.
process of creating that for Christians with OCD who are struggling to provide some of those pieces that we talked about today, the education piece, the
So important. I
mindfulness,
love
and
that you're doing that.
yeah,
So important. I will
yeah,
definitely
it
be tapping into that for my clients and getting them to you as well, just so they can have you
awesome.
as a resource. That's so important. As
Yeah, I
Christians, to
love
me,
that.
we should lead the way when it comes to mental health, actually overall health, marriage health, family health. We should lead the way. So I love what you're doing. I love that you're speaking life into a world that is hurting. So thank you so much for being on the show and for talking with me.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to talk about OCD in the Christian context. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to the Healing Lives with Corey Gilbert podcast. It has been an honor to serve. If you are struggling, have questions, or in need, Dr. Gilbert offers a free consultation for new clients. Check us out at healinglives.com to book a call. If this has been helpful to you, please share it, leave a review, and help us get the word out so that we can see lives changed, marriages transformed, and more people come into a life-changing relationship with Jesus Christ. The Healing Lives Center offers online courses, programs, books, intensives, and other services to help you live biblically and well. Discover more resources on YouTube and in Dr. Gilbert's Healing Marriage Facebook group, The Healing Marriage.